In 1956, Jacques Cousteau famously described the ocean as a silent world. To those early explorers descending beneath the waves, the underwater realm felt calm and almost otherworldly compared to the constant noise of life above the surface. And even today, many people who rarely spend time in the ocean still imagine it that way, as a quiet, peaceful place far removed from the bustle of the human world. But we know that's not quite the case anymore. The oceans are in fact bustling with a cacophony of noise and sounds, from the pop of tiny shrimps snapping their claws to the low-frequency bellow of a blue whale. Oceans are in fact not so silent, and here with us today to unpack exactly how noisy life beneath the waves actually is Professor Steve Simpson.
Welcome to Ocean Unpacked, your one-stop shop for the latest ocean news, exciting new marine research, all with some amazing, interesting marine facts, with me, Greg Holder.
And me, Julian Giovalino.
And as Julian said, we have the amazing Steve Simpson here today. Just to give you a quick summary of who Steve Simpson is, he's a Professor of Marine Biology and Global Change at the University of Bristol, with a specialism in fish ecology, particularly on coral reef fishes, bioacoustics, and the effects of climate change on fisheries and marine ecosystems. He was also the academic advisor and featured scientist on Blue Planet 2, with chief scientific advisor of Our Oceans, and of course also the director of the Masters Science Communications for a Better Planet. Welcome, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So obviously you heard from Julian's extract there about what Jacques Cousteau thought of the ocean and how he described it. What are your thoughts on that, and how does the ocean actually sound?
Yeah, I mean, you can't really blame poor Jacques Cousteau. Like he's the one who's really got us underwater. You know, he cobbled together bits of breathing apparatus from fire stations to be able to build an aqualung, which is now what we use in open circuit scuba, right? Almost everyone around the planet uses this design of an aqualung. But his device was hugely noisy, okay? Mm-hmm. So any kind of breathing, it sounded like Darth Vader was diving with you. And he did a lot of his exploring in chainmail because he was petrified of being eaten by sharks. And so he was big and cumbersome and noisy. And he was also then using underwater scooters. So to him, all he heard was the sound of his own diving. What he couldn't hear at the time was this enormous orchestra that lives in the ocean. You know, there are millions of species of animals in the ocean. Sound is one of the most powerful ways that animals can communicate with each other underwater. It's the way that they can interpret their environment. They can choose where to move, where to live. How to avoid predators, how to call each other, how to impress each other when it comes to mating. And all of this sound, when you add it up, creates this, as you described it, cacophony. It's exactly that. It's just the most beautiful, diverse, varied, action-packed soundscape.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think for a lot of people, when they think of marine life in the oceans making sounds, I think the first thing that does come to mind is kind of cetaceans, you know, dolphins and whales. But you obviously said, you know, everything is vocalizing, everything is making sounds. But, you know, could you give kind of some examples of what kind of animals are making sounds?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the blue whale, obviously, that can produce these very low frequency sounds, communicate across entire oceans. And then you've got some of the other baleen whales, things like humpback whales, that have the most haunting, beautiful, complex song. And when you're lucky to be in the water where males are singing, it really is one of the most kind of close to spiritual experiences you can have in the ocean. Dolphins, of course, are very social animals, and they have their own whistle, which is a signature, which is effectively their name, that only their close family members can faithfully recreate, which means that they've effectively got this family bond simply through the sounds that they make. Now, there are hundreds of species of marine mammals. There are thousands, tens of thousands of species of fish. And we don't know how many fish species make sound, but it is in the thousands to tens of thousands, right? And fish make sounds in a whole range of different ways. So they're not like marine mammals or like mammals like we are. They might grind their teeth together. They might click their jaw. Some fish have a swim bladder, which is a bit like the aqualung and the inflatable bag that Jacques Cousteau used for diving. But this swim bladder filled with oxygen can resonate. Muscles around the swim bladder good at vibrating, and that then can create quite tonal sounds. Fish can effectively sing using their swim bladder. And so you've got this whole range of different species sounds that you get from fish. Normally, it's not just sound that they make for the sake of it, it's sound that they're making because they're really trying to communicate in some way. And then you've got the invertebrates, right? So there's tens of thousands of fish, there's hundreds of thousands of invertebrates that make sound. The snapping shrimp, obviously, is a really good example, which has this incredible giant-sized claw. I mean, giant size, the shrimp is the size of your thumb, and the claw is about the size of your thumb tip. But it is this enormous structure that it's able to rapidly open, create a vacuum inside, micro bubbles, then gas out, form a big bubble in the claw that when they close it, fires the bubble into the water. The pressure of the water causes the bubble to implode. You get a flash of light. The water goes to about 3,000 Celsius and an enormous bang that goes with it. So you can't keep a snapping shrimp in a tank because it can smash the glass using this sonic weapon.
Incredible.
And then you've got a lot of kind of incidental sounds, sea urchins scraping away at the reef, animals moving around, the lobster that will, they've got effectively like barbs on their antennae, so they can play them a bit like a violinist would be rubbing the bow over the strings, and they can make some quite interesting, again, normally courtship sounds through their antennae. So when you put all of that together, my word, is that an orchestra?
Yeah, it sounds like there's the different compartments, right? There's like the string section and the winds, and there's these different ways to create sound, just like we create music in different ways with different instrument categories.
Yeah, that's right. You've got the percussion, you've got you've got the wind section, and some of those can be quite rude sounding wind type sounds because the animals just however they've evolved to be able to make that sound, and in turn their ears or their hearing structures have evolved to receive them. Then there's this real diversity of sounds.
Yeah, that's like obviously with you're incredibly passionate about all the sounds in the ocean, which is amazing. Obviously, as Jacques Cousteau showed, and as the general sort of public's outlook is, diving or the underwater world is very visual for most people. What inspired you to start looking into the thing that we can't see, the sound, the underappreciated part of the ocean?
So, I guess I was initially interested in coral reefs from the perspective of the people that depended on them. So from the perspective of tropical fisheries, where hundreds of millions of people around the world depend on fish and protein and micronutrients from the coral reef as a key part of their diet. And so I was very interested in the population dynamics of fisheries on coral reefs, trying to understand where, if you fish from a reef, the next generation of fish will come from. So how is that fishery being replenished in a way that you could ever fish it sustainably? And I spent time working in Mozambique and in Belize and in the British Virgin Islands, various different parts of the tropics. And as we tried to build models that it's what you call connectivity, where you've got different subpopulations. Some of them are producing offspring, and those are then landing and adding into a population that you might be fishing. So trying to understand connectivity on coral reefs meant that we had to understand the early life of those fish, which happens almost for every species out at sea. So although you call a coral reef fish lives on a coral reef, first few days of its life, it's out in the big blue. And it really is very vulnerable, swimming out in the ocean currents. And at the end of that, whether it's a few days up to a few months in some species, they've got to go and find somewhere to live. They've got to choose, and they've got to make a decision. I mean, imagine if you'd had to choose where you were going to be based for the rest of your life when you were 7 days old. That's a big decision to make, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is when you're 7 days old and you're a small fish, then almost everything wants to eat you. So if you're making bad decisions and you're running the risk of being eaten time after time as you keep making the wrong decision, then you've got no chance. So it turns out that these fish have really, really highly tuned sensory systems that allow them to be able to interpret the environment before they make that final decision. So they've only got to land on a reef once and then they're home. And the question is, how do they do that? And so this is kind of back in the late 1990s, there were studies that were just starting to demonstrate that even some fish would, despite spending weeks in the plankton, end up back on the reef they started. So, it's called self-recruitment, but it's almost like this kind of prodigal fish that goes off into exile and then comes back, lands back on the reef it started, which means that it's not a random process. These fish are tuned into their environment. They're making very key decisions. And so in about the time that we were starting getting involved in research as young researchers in the early 2000s, there were groups around the world working on the sense of smell, on vision, on use of magnetism, magnetic cues. And people weren't really looking at sound, partly, like you say, you can't see it. It's not something underwater that we sense very well.
No, not at all.
And at the time, it was also something that was quite hard to measure.
Yeah.
The only people really measuring sound underwater were the Navy, who didn't want to tell anyone what they were were finding, right? Except for the fact when you looked at the really early papers and reports written by the Navy from back in the 1960s, they would always complain about biological noise being this kind of nuisance that meant they couldn't hear the submarine or they couldn't hear the distant ship because this reef was just making so much noise. Yeah. So we thought, well, hang on a minute, if the reef is super noisy and these animals have got to choose where to live and the noise is being made by the community that they're choosing whether or not they want to join, possibly sound might be one of those things. So we started listening to the reef and even just those early days as you know, just starting to think about it, you'd swim out over a reef and the same fish, if you swam in the same little patrol, same fish each day would come and they would vocalize at you. And you'd start to hear the variety of sounds and you'd hear why they were doing it. You were in their territory. They were trying to impress each other.
So back in those, in like the early 2000s, I mean, I'm not sure what kind of equipment you would have had at the time. And you were saying that, you know, you'd hear, let's say, the dams or the anemone fish coming up and vocalizing at you. How at the time, how would you study it? Like, how would you measure it?
I mean,
measure it?
It was really easy. You normally flew to somewhere and went to a hypermarket, supermarket, and bought something inflatable. So,
okay.
you know, if it was somewhere like Mozambique, it would normally be an old tractor in a tube. If it was somewhere like the Philippines, that's where I bought my inflatable Batmobile.
Yeah.
But basically something that floats,
Yeah.
that you could sit on, that could take your weight. And then you would swim out to the reef with your snorkeling gear on, pushing your whatever floating device you've got.
Yeah.
And then you'd jump up into it, and then I'd have a little waterproof bag, unroll that, and pull out this. At the time, it was the most expensive bit of equipment I had. It was a hydrophone that was on a cable that I could drop into the water, and that was connected then at the time into a DAT recorder, so a little digital tape recorder that I could then make recordings of the reef. And it was really those early studies where we were swimming out over to the reef, you know, particularly going to the same spot hour after hour, that we started to recognize that the reef has all this pattern in the noise. We heard for the first time the dawn chorus as all of the daytime fish come out and start establishing territory. We heard the dusk chorus where all the nighttime fish, the nocturnals, would all come out of their caves and all go and start vocalizing with each other. And it brought the reef noise, the reef soundscape to life.
And how has the technology changed? Because you said obviously that was, you know, in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
What's the technology looking like now?
Like 25 years, like it's fundamentally different.
Yeah.
You know, we've got probably, hazard a guess, 100,000 recording devices within a community that work together, that are recording in the oceans. And some of these devices now are very simple to use, very cheap. So they can be, you know, we can go to a reef and we can put 50 of them across a reef and really pick up the rich tapestry of the soundscape. Citizen scientists will use them to be able to put out. We work with lots of local NGOs in different parts of the world who are now, with our equipment, taking recordings almost constantly in some of these key areas that they work. And then I guess that's the kind of entry level equipment. When we go through to, say, certainly anything that we might use filming a natural history film, we've got multi-directional arrays of hydrophones that we can swim through an environment, recording in different directions, creating a spatial understanding of the soundscape. And then the other real advance now is that it got to the point where it was very easy to take recordings, very hard to analyze them all, because you'd sit there in a dark room with headphones, listening and writing down all the sounds you could hear, right? But if you can take millions of hours of recordings, you can't do that. But luckily, AI tools, machine learning particularly, gives us an opportunity to be able to batch process all the recordings from a location ever taken, or all the recordings taken on a moment in time in across the world's oceans.
Yes.
Or to go and find patterns in the sound that we can't keep track with. It's such a random, seemingly random soundscape. And yet you might within that have two fish that are duetting, and you just don't really notice it. But the machine is very powerful at being able to go and do that now.
So more recently, you've been training AI tools and using machine learning to now actually be able to pick up these small nuances in these like massively diverse recordings.
Yeah, we've partly been doing that in an unsupervised way, which is where the machine goes and finds sounds and characterizes them all. We've also had a project called Calling in Our Corals that we set up with Google Arts and Culture, which is where we engaged hundreds of thousands of citizen scientists to listen to recordings and to be able to interact with those recordings. So that then created this kind of global ear, this massive community of people that were helping to gather data. And what they gather then is not just raw data, it's also the information that we can use to train the machine to then be able to do it better. Yeah,
I think I'm going to know the answer to this question given the technological advances that you've just described. But are there are there sounds that you're still discovering recently that are blowing you away, that are surprising you?
Always, absolutely. I mean, I'd say probably 80% of the sounds we ever hear, we don't know who makes them. You know, so there's this at the moment, you know, global effort to try and identify and link a sound to a species. And luckily, it's not a competitive world that we work in. It's a very collaborative global effort. There's some amazing groups now that have been, again, using AI tools to link 360 cameras with hydrophone arrays, so that then as you watch a video of a fish swimming around, say, the sound is being picked up and it's attributing each sound to each species. Wow. So an amazing study they did in Curacao, Southern Caribbean, where in 10 hours of video, they characterized 4 times more species than had been characterized up until that point in history, just from 10 minutes of work. You know, that was the last probably 60 years of research. And then in 10 hours, just 4 times as much.
From filming a patch of reef.
So we're right on the So we're right on that cusp of being able to create the songbook of the ocean. And to be able to use that to monitor behaviour, monitor biodiversity, understand patterns on coral reefs.
That's amazing. Right, we're gonna pause on the discussions for a second because we're gonna play a quick game. Because in a minute, I'm gonna ask you to give us your top maybe 3 or 4 fish noises and give the impression. But before we start that, Julian's going to give his favourite fish impression, and you've got to work out
exactly
what fish it is.
Yeah. So obviously,
practicing.
We know each other from the Maldives. We did some filming with Argentine Planet, and for me, that was, I think, kind of experiencing and viewing your work was the first time I've been exposed to bioacoustics. And there's definitely a fish whose call I absolutely love, and I'm always obsessed with. I'm going to do it. I'm going to see if you can identify it. Okay.
Whoop, 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 whoop. Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. As an ambon damselfish, the whooping damselfish.
Yeah.
Or is that the one you were going for?
Oh, actually, maybe.
Let's hear it again.
Yeah, let's hear it again.
Let's try it was like whoop, 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 whoop.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
Whoop, 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 whoop.
The pub laugh fish.
No, maybe there's more than that.
Julie, maybe you need to work on your impressions.
Maybe
probably.
my call, I was thinking, is the regal angelfish.
Oh, the regal angelfish. Okay, yeah. No, there was that. Whoop, whoop, whoop,
yeah.
That was... Okay, that was quite a fall off that it had. It was like whoop, whoop,
oh,
whoop,
see,
whoop,
it was my intonation.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, it might be in the next reef.
Back to the training room, Julian.
Yeah, exactly, that's not bad. Though.
Yeah,
that's
but I do
not
remember
bad.
because that was one of exactly what you're describing. That was one of the fish that you'd recorded, where you'd place this camera system and then all the hydromorphs, and then we have a video that would play in the marine center where we worked with, and you just see the fish come out,
get it every time.
You just hear it, and every time I like watch the video and I hear it, I think it's insane that a fish makes that noise.
Well, we've heard Julian butcher fish noises. Steve, let's hear your top 3 fish species noise.
Well, I've given the name of one of them away, but I'll do it anyway, and it goes whoa, 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 whoa.
Oh, that is a very good one.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
I can imagine a fish making that noise. It sounds like an evil laugh.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And what is that then?
Well, we think it's a kind of grouper. We don't know which species. It's on the Great Barrier Reef, and we call it the pub laugh fish. It's just whoa, 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 whoa.
That is
which is a great sound. But
you know what? If you were to say, imagine what a noise a grouper would make.
Right.
It's something like
You've
that.
got
They're just
that,
kind of these like menacing looking, upturned frown on their face.
Yeah,
so
they're not born with a
amazing.
smile, are they?
Yeah.
They are the villain of the
Yes,
coral reef, so I think
yeah.
that works quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay, another one. So one of the favourite sounds I've got at the moment, it goes doo 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 doo.
That's the kind of fish that Julian would go to a party with. I think that's the kind of bit of drum and bass.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I mean, I call it the go and trance fish, right?
Oh yeah.
You know where the
yeah.
sun's rising and you've
Yeah.
been dancing all night and you just got
Yeah.
this doo 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 doo
That's
sort of
part
sound.
that's part of the dawn call.
Yeah,
the
yeah.
sunshine.
Well, but yeah, exactly. Just when you don't need
Yeah.
dawn. But what I found out that is the emperor angelfish. And I was amazed, right? So I grew up with the emperor angelfish as my favourite fish species.
Yeah.
I wrote books about this fish called Solo when I was about 8. And it was an emperor angelfish that I copied from a book.
Yeah.
And so I've always been a bit obsessed with them. If I see them when I'm diving, I'll always spend a bit of time with them. And they're kind of shy, but they get used to you. So you can actually then, spend some good time with an emperor angelfish.
And beautiful
And-
juvenile.
Oh, they're
state.
stunning.
Oh, I think that's one
Absolutely
of my favourite
stunning.
patterns
Yeah,
on the reef.
absolutely. So we did a project with Sea Life London Aquarium,
Yeah.
where they wanted us to go and take recordings of different fish species in the London Aquarium, turned all the pumps and bubblers and stuff off, and we got to spend a bit of time before the public arrived, early one morning, taking recordings on all the tanks. And we picked up this doo, 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 like that. And I was looking around and I was thinking, the only fish here is an emperor angelfish.
Yeah.
So it's got to be the emperor angelfish. Since then, I've realised that it is a really classic sound of an emperor angelfish. And so when you're scuba diving, if you swim, and you get that emperor angelfish used to your presence, you can actually go up to the emperor angelfish and through your regulator go doo doo doo, and it will go doo doo doo
No
back to you.
way. Oh,
It's the
that's
only
amazing.
fish that I found you can actually talk
Really?
to
Have
a
underwater.
conversation with.
And by chance, it's my favourite fish species from ever.
Oh, that
So
must have been
it's-
such
yeah.
a full circle moment.
I know,
coming
honestly.
back to
Yes,
the emperor
yeah,
angelfish.
absolutely. So maybe in a previous life, I was an
Yeah.
emperor angelfish. Who
Yeah,
knows?
I think that's so
Yeah.
cool because I think when I think of the way you're describing all these different fish calls, it's very similar to bird calls, and now birding and bird calling is such like an established art form. Let's say being able to mimic a bird call and have it respond, and now hearing that you can actually do that with fish as well, it opens up a whole new world.
It really
And I
does.
think that's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
cool.
And on that note now of opening up this whole new world, how can this knowledge help us protect marine environments?
Yeah, so lots of ways. I mean, we're kind of calling it an acoustic toolkit that we've been developing. Again, a global community of acousticians and marine biologists. So, I guess at one stage, or at one level, you can use the ocean soundscape to understand the ocean better. So you can use it to measure biodiversity, to look at changes in patterns of biodiversity. So it might be that you've got a area that you're worried about, and so you can take long-term recordings and you can monitor whether the biodiversity of the soundscape is changing, which indicates that you've got either negative or positive change. If you set up a marine protected area, then you can demonstrate that reef coming back to life using sound, and you often hear animals you never see. So it's a really good complement for what you might ever go and do if you're a scuba diver and you were going to go and write everything down. You can also then use sound to understand behaviour. So you can understand things like breeding patterns, courtship. You can listen out for spawning aggregations as they form, and you can know then to go and protect those. So that's the kind of passive side of what you can do.
Yeah.
From the active side, you can then use sound as a positive toolkit. So you can use it, say, to through an acoustic enrichment, to add sound to an environment that might have lost its natural soundscape. On coral reefs, we're seeing a lot of bleaching, but these heat waves that are killing corals on a large scale. And with that death of the coral reef comes the death of the soundscape. The animals are no longer there making sound, and we take historic recordings and pipe them back into that dead habitat to call in the next generation of fish and invertebrates and things that all come and start to settle. And by doing that, they start to clean up the local area and start to make it their home, and gradually that reef then can come back to life. But we're also finding that we can actively interact with individuals. So we can not just call out into the wild, we can acoustically anchor, particularly corals, at sites where we release them. So by catching coral eggs, allowing the larvae to develop, getting to the point that they're competent, ready to make their home, we can play sound in the areas we want them to live. And that then gives us a chance of increasing both the survival of every coral larva, but also then being able to focus our restoration efforts in particular locations.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of active restoration side of things. The other thing that sound, when you listen to reefs or listen to the ocean around the world, you recognize that you've got three types of sound. You've got the biological sound, you've got some geological type sound, rain, wind, earthquakes, things like that. But then you've got human noise, and that's the kind of anthropogenic noise. And that can dominate a soundscape. Sometimes you can't hear biology because there's so much noise being produced by machines. And so by understanding what a natural soundscape should sound like, knowing which animals might be present, you can then understand the impacts that noise pollution that comes in many different forms might be having. And so noise pollution can be short-term things. It can be the passing of a boat. It can be the passing of an aeroplane or helicopter, and that sound transferring into the ocean. Or it can be something that's more impactful, but is short-term, things like a seismic survey using air guns to go and find new oil and gas fields. Or it can be a more long-term noise. So it might be a shipping lane, or it might be a port or harbour, or even a wind farm, for example. The wind farm makes noise both during the construction phase and also then when it's operating.
Yeah.
So by understanding how noise can be a problem, and we can run lots of experiments now to look at whether it causes stress in animals, whether it changes their behaviour, alters their ability to respond to predators, causes hormonal changes in their blood and so on. We can then think about how do we fix those problems. And that's the thing that I find really exciting, that noise is such a point source pollutant. You know where it's being made, you know who it's being made by, and you know when it's being made. You can change all of those things.
Yeah.
So you can change the technology. You can have quieter boats, quieter boat engines, different ways of going searching for oil and gas, different ways of building foundations in the ocean. Yeah. And you can also, if you've got particularly sensitive locations, avoid making noise there. If you've got a nursery ground or a spawning aggregation site, and you can choose when you make it or when you don't. So particularly for wind farms, they're often built on quite shallow, muddy, sandy habitats, good places to build foundations. But those are really important nursery and breeding grounds for fish, but not all year, just for a month maybe each year. Yeah. So it gives you that opportunity to say, right, we're downing tools, we're going to have a quiet month, let the fish come in, do their thing, leave, and then we'll carry on building the wind farm. Yeah. And you've got all that control.
Yeah, I think that actually ties quite nicely to one of the topics, or one of the kind of big news topics that we wanted to talk to you about, which is about essentially in the last couple of months, there's been some announcements of the UK joining this kind of major multinational offshore wind expansion project. I think it's one of the most ambitious, one of the largest ones in the North Sea ever done. And obviously it's a fantastic step in the right direction towards decarbonisation. But as you said, wind turbines, they can produce a lot of noise on land. When we're just kind of walking in, some fields, you can hear the wind turbines spinning, as well as, I remember the first time I stood under wind turbine was also quite taken aback by just how loud it can be just from the actual turbine spinning. But when you're talking about offshore wind turbines, especially wind farms on the scale of the project that the UK has just joined, kind of what potential impacts could that have on marine life, on the marine environment? And, you mentioned a little bit of what are some ways that we can mitigate that.
Yeah. So I guess, once the site has been selected, you measure the wind, you measure the seabed and things like that. First thing, particularly for the North Sea, that you have to do is to go and find all the unexploded bombs that have been dropped in the North Sea, normally by returning aircraft on bombing raids during the Second World War particularly. So either German planes going back to Germany. It was too dangerous to land a plane loaded with bombs. So you would drop them in the ocean, get rid of them before you could safely land. Yeah. And the same was true with all of those coming back into the UK. So if you want to go and build a wind farm, chances are you're going to be doing it in a site that's peppered with unexploded ordnance. And so using kind of shallow sonar systems, possible to go and find those. So there's now a lot of work on how do you explode a bomb quietly. How do you, perhaps with a bubble curtain, surround the ordnance so that bubble curtain contains the sound, or you have fuses that kind of do a soft explosion that kind of explode it slowly. That then gives you the clear building site that you can start working in. And historically, the easiest way to build a foundation for a wind turbine was to hammer a huge pile into the seabed. So these might be 30 meters long, 10 meters wide. Okay, so we're talking about a very long steel tube that takes thousands or tens of thousands of hammer strikes to knock it into the seabed, which is very noisy. You can hear that for hundreds of kilometers.
Yeah.
And that might still not be the worst thing you do, because the alternative, as you say, is that you carry on burning oil and gas.
Yeah.
But at least you can choose to do that. If you see that there are whales in the area, you might stop hammering. You can have a soft start, so you start hammering quietly, give animals a chance to leave the area, and then start hammering harder. But there's a lot of other foundations that have now been innovated. So things like corkscrew, like screw piling, or vibro piling, where you shake the pile into the ground rather than hit it.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference in terms of reducing the amount of noise. So let's imagine you've now put in all the foundations to your wind farm. That can be several years of noise that you've been making. And you put the turbines on top of each of those foundations. Once they're in operation, actually, they're pretty quiet. A lot of the sound, like you say, is that you hear it above the water. And a lot of that sound then doesn't transfer down into the water. But you can hear an operating wind farm. Normally, obviously, it's operating faster when it's windy. So then the surface chop on the water, which is creating its own natural soundscape anyway, which masks the sound of the wind turbines. But there were early concerns that the sound of an operating wind farm might be a real problem for particularly marine mammals that want to use that area. And so a study that tagged a bunch of seals expected these seals, once the wind turbines were in operation, to leave the area or to avoid feeding around the turbine sites. What they found was the absolute opposite. These seals, despite the fact that there was a bit of noise, realised that these turbines were a huge artificial reef. And so they were surrounded. They were basically a little bit noisy, but they were a supermarket. And you could just swim straight line from one to the next and go and get the next feed. So they became a massive opportunity. And I think, any decision that anyone makes, any animal makes, is a cost benefit. And the benefit of feeding at the turbine was much greater than the cost of the noise and having to tolerate that.
Built an all-you-can-eat buffet for the seals and so many other animals as well. And that is one of the big positives of offshore wind farms, is those artificial reefs basically you're building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, we talk about avoiding burning fossil fuels and, of course, the climate crisis. With our warming oceans, are you seeing any direct impact on the noises of reefs and fish making noises in a warming ocean?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the most depressing parts of our work, is going to sites either that have historically been wonderful, but we've revisited and we found that there's been a lot of either local pollution or there's been a heat wave that's killed that reef off. The worst is when you're actually there and witnessing it and you're just watching the reef cook. The first stage of it is the bleaching, where the reef goes ghostly white. The corals eject all of the plant-like cells that live in their tissue that give them most of their energy. So the reef looks in some way kind of ghostly beautiful, being brilliant white. But the reality is that every one of those little coral polyps is starving to death. And you're watching this mass starvation.
It's devastating.
And really, corals can't survive more than 2 or 3 weeks in that state, otherwise they're gone. And so then when you take recordings at those bleached reefs where the algae has now overgrown the dead coral skeletons, you realise that the reef has gone quiet. And I think that's one of the saddest things, both to witness visually, but also to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think, is that obviously the cause of the bleaching is causing the reef to go quiet because the fish leave? Do you think there's any other impact on the noises that fish can make in a warming ocean, or the sounds, or is it purely the warming oceans causing things like bleaching, which then cause the fish to move out?
Yeah, and I mean, you say they move out. The sad thing is, in many places, there's nowhere to move, so they move out by dying, and they either by themselves starving.
I think
disease that spreads across the reef.
That was definitely one of the most kind of I guess, shocking scenes, because we in the recent 2024 bleaching event, we were also in the Maldives, and we talked about this in an early episode about one of the reefs that just, went a few months back. It was one of the most pristine reefs, incredible coral cover, and then just like month after month, you just see it go completely white, absolutely cooking. But then you'd see these damselfish. You have these completely bleached coral colonies that were already starting to grow over with algae. So most of the polyps had already starved and died off. Yeah. But then you still had the damselfish that were still kind of staying there, still hiding in the branches, but then obviously not having that same level of protection as before.
No, it's really sad to see. I mean, in terms of climate change and what other impacts that brings to the soundscape, we certainly know that with increased CO2 in the atmosphere, that increases the amount of CO2 dissolving in seawater, causing ocean acidification. That changes how sound travels over longer distances.
Right.
So there's less chemical interaction with the sound energy, which means that sound can travel further, faster, and therefore stay noisier for longer. Yeah. And if the noise is human noise, anthropogenic noise, then we're kind of increasing the noisiness of the ocean through ocean acidification. Right. But then, I guess, the other most obvious effect of climate change around the world, but certainly in the ocean, is the change in the storminess of the ocean, change in these patterns of extreme weather, the number and the severity of cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons. And with that then brings an enormous amount of what is naturally valuable destruction that creates space for new life, but increasingly is just hammering these reefs to death. Yeah. And as a result, you've got all of the noise of the storm, but you've also then got the silence that follows, because that habitat is just, event after event dying away.
So it just seems, from the sounds of it, anthropogenic noise, plus then, like you said, the impacts of climate change from increased storm intensity, it just seems like these natural biological soundscapes are just being hammered from all different ends. Would you say that in terms of human noise, what is actually... Because we've talked a little bit about wind turbines, and actually that the actual turning of the turbines isn't as potentially impactful as we might have thought. But what would you say is the actual most impactful form of human noise?
The most prevalent is shipping noise.
Shipping,
there's 50,000 ships traveling around the world, and that low frequency sound that the ships are making is pretty much audible in the deepest oceans, in the poles, everywhere you go, you can hear a ship pretty much. The more intense sounds, so particularly oil and gas surveys and construction noise, can cause physical damage to animals that are in the vicinity. So that can have a pretty deleterious effect. But then there are probably tens or hundreds of millions of motorboats going around. So at a local scale, the sound that you might, as a coral reef organism, be most exposed to is the sound of motorboats. And that can cause distraction. Yeah. If you're distracted at the wrong moment, you might get eaten.
Exactly. Yeah.
If you're halfway through an elaborate courtship dance, and then you get masked out, then there's a huge amount of energy lost and impacts on reproduction and so on.
Yeah, it does make me think of you get some obviously these beautiful reefs that are in the tropics that, because of its beauty, attracts a lot of tourists, attracts a lot of people. And I've definitely been to some reefs in Indonesia, reefs in Malaysia, where you go snorkeling on the reef, and at any one point there could be 20, 30 boats all in there, engines are all roaring, people are all splashing and kind of making lots of noise, and this is throughout the entire day. Well, it's the sound of loving a place to death. Unfortunately. But again, I think there's great cause for optimism about this, because not only do we realize that that's now a problem, but we can find many good solutions to that, right? So boats turning off their engines when they're at anchor, or attaching to moorings rather than dynamic positioning the whole time, makes a big difference. Scuba equipment's getting more quiet, and obviously rebreathers are a game changer in terms of how quiet they're underwater. Electric boat engines, which you might not use for long distance commutes to far-flung dive sites, but as you approach the dive site, you can switch from a big diesel or petrol engine to an electric engine and then come in very quietly.
And that's not just kind of good practice. It's, it's giving nature a bit of space. It's increasing as a diver your chance of ever seeing anything.
Absolutely.
Because you haven't scared it away.
Yeah.
So it's a real win-win that if we interact with the natural world in a more harmonious way, we're going to have better interactions. So everyone's winning.
Yeah, absolutely. You definitely see that on a dive when you're enjoying an amazing interaction. You hear the boat coming back round, and everything starts behaving differently. And it's annoying for us as well. When you're on a dive and you hear the boat, it's like, oh man, this is so grinding. Imagine what it's like for them.
And for me, I quite enjoy underwater photography as well. And when you're doing it on scuba, you see an emperor angelfish that you want to take a photo of, but obviously because of all the bubbles coming out of your regulator, it does just keep its distance from you. Whereas when you actually free dive down. And that's what I enjoy about freediving is that you're just making absolutely no noise.
Absolutely.
And they notice that. So
Right, Steve. So before we wrap up with a question about optimism, we're going to play a quick challenge with you. We're going to do a quick fire round where you're going to have 60 seconds to try and answer as many of the questions as you can. That we throw at you. And we're going to keep score and compare you to other guests as well.
Brutal. Okay.
So are you ready, Steve? Just answer the question as quickly as possible, and then I'll tell you the score at the end. Okay, let's go. What's the term for a group of jellyfish?
A wobble.
What is the term for when a whale dies and its carcass sinks to the ocean floor?
Whale fall.
What percentage of the ocean has been explored by humans?
Less than 1%.
What is the name of the deepest point in the ocean?
Marianas Trench.
A bit more specific?
I don't know that.
Okay, half point.
Okay.
How long can a Greenland shark live?
230 years.
What gas does phytoplankton produce that makes critical for all life on Earth?
Oxygen.
Which ocean is the largest on Earth?
Pacific.
Which is the only sea in the world that has no coastline? It's bordered entirely by ocean currents.
Southern Ocean.
How many hearts does an octopus have?
9.
What is the name of the symbiotic algae that lives inside coral and gives it colour and energy?
Zooxanthellae or Symbiodinium.
What is the mesophotic coral ecosystem? What is a mesophotic coral ecosystem?
It's a deeper water, 200 meters or so.
We'll definitely give you that one. Good job.
That was strong.
Brutal.
Right.
What is the collective noun for jellyfish?
A smack.
A smack.
Of course.
I love you went straight. You just no hesitation. Wobble.
I think they should change it to a wobble.
It is now.
It's much more appropriate. But yes, so you got whale fall. The percentage of ocean explored by humans is around 20%, apparently. Even though I'm a bit surprised by that as well.
We might need to fact check that.
The deepest point is the Mariana Trench, but more specifically Challenger Deep. That specific deepest point. Greenland sharks, you said 230. It can be over 400 years, but scientists have said anywhere from 300 to 530.
Okay,
so
I don't get
it's
that.
a little bit too low. They definitely are longer than 200.
I had a juvenile.
Gas is obviously oxygen, which you got. Pacific Ocean is the largest. The Sargasso Sea is the only ocean without a coastline in it. So it doesn't have any coastline in the whole sea. Where Southern Ocean obviously does have coastline around Antarctica.
Yeah.
Octopus have 3 hearts.
Oh, do they?
9 brains, I think.
9 brains, I knew that.
Yeah.
I thought they might have a heart for each brain.
That would make sense. Octopus are weird like that.
Yeah.
Of course, Zooxanthellae is the symbiotic algae. And you got the mesophotic coral ecosystem, which is a deep one. So good work. What was that?
6.
6.
Okay.
It's a good start in 60 seconds, one every 10 seconds. Awesome. Thank you for joining that. I hope that was a bit of fun. And Julian, I think you've got one last question.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we've been talking a lot about your research into soundscapes, but also we're talking a lot about how the oceans are being impacted by anthropogenic change, like noise pollution or like climate change. I think a lot of the times we see a lot of this kind of doom and gloom sentiment when we think about ocean conservation. And, for people working in marine science or just simply those who kind of care deeply about the ocean, it can sometimes feel very overwhelming or even hopeless. So what is your way to kind of stay optimistic and stay positive in this kind of scene?
I think the ocean is still absolutely full of wonder. So any time you go and visit the ocean, it's that you have a little magic moment. And so keeping connected to the ocean, whether it's dipping your feet, whether it's looking in a rock pool, whether it's swimming, snorkeling, scuba diving, is a way of re-energizing yourself with this other world that you love. I think certainly ocean optimism is a kind of global phenomenon that started with Nancy Knowlton, who famously started getting us to share stories in social media of positive news. So if people made a discovery that was positive, if people had evidence of restoration or of conservation working, then that got shared with a hashtag ocean optimism, which is a really good way of kind of making, at least balancing out some of the negativity that we hear. But I think optimism will only get us so far. Optimism is kind of, on an individual basis, it's a personality trait. You might have it, you might not. On a global scale, it is a reason to start to think more positively. But what you need is action. And I think for a growing number of people, this recognition that there is there is value, but there's also reason to hope that the future will be better than it is now for the oceans, for everywhere, but for the oceans, means that then your actions day by day are going to get inspired by that. So that's what you call active hope. Each day is a daily practice. You get up in the morning and you think, I'm going to do something today that's going to make the oceans better in the future. And I'm going to tell people about it. And those people might get inspired to do their own thing and come up with their own ideas as well. And so then it becomes a movement. People are all getting involved. And if everybody is actively hoping that the ocean will be better, by its very nature, that ocean will get better.
Yeah.
And I think it's in our gift as humanity to be able to rescue the oceans, rescue coral reefs, fix the climate emergency. And it won't be tomorrow. It might be in a few generations' time. Yeah. We can at least dare to dream and therefore act on that dream, that the oceans will be better than we will ever witness them.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Steve. I've definitely learned a lot in this episode. I thought I knew a little bit about bioacoustics, having known you for so long, but actually there's so much more.
Same.
Super.
And
I still,
well, that quiz, I've learned enormous amount.
It's all learning experience.
I still think my favorite fact is definitely the noise that a grouper makes. That laugh is just
No, that I completely blew me away.
Classic villain.
But thank you so much for joining us on this episode. It's been really, really interesting. And we'll finish it off there.
Good luck with it.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, and subscribe and give us a review if you can. It's an early podcast, so we appreciate any reviews, any comments, any support we can do, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.